Our Torah reading today is from Parashat Vayishlach. And Vayishlach begins with one of the most famous narratives in the Torah, which is Yaakov. It starts on page 198, toward the beginning of chapter 32 of Genesis, with Yaakov being so fearful of the upcoming confrontation with his twin brother Esav. He has good reason to fear externally. He left home believing his brother wanted to kill him. And he probably has some internal bases for his fear as well. His own guilt, perhaps externalized and projected onto his brother. He does everything he can to sort of protect himself. He prays, he sends all kinds of this enormous gift meant to appease, and also a show of strength meant perhaps to intimidate. And ultimately, he is left alone in this remarkable scene on the banks of the Yabok, where he wrestles with this ambiguous figure that most likely represents some part of himself, and also his struggles with God and his struggles with other people. And he engages in this wrestling and holds on until it yields his blessing, a blessing for him. He is transformed thereby. He takes the name Yisrael in addition to Yaakov, and he also emerges wounded with a limp. He then meets up with Esav. Things go much better than expected. There's ambiguity about the actual nature of this reunion. Is it deep and real friendship and brotherly love and forgiveness, or is there an edge underneath it? We don't know. On the surface of the text, it seems deep and real. Nevertheless, the brothers go their separate ways, and Jacob arrives at the bottom of page 205. We read, Vayavo Yaakov Shalem Ir Shechem. He arrives in the city of Shechem whole. And then things really fall apart. And that takes us to the chapter that we are going to be reading this morning. And it is a very, very difficult and painful chapter. I spoke last night about my own struggles with teaching Torah during this time, especially on Friday night, when I'm struggling with the need for the Torah to speak to the issues of the day, and also my sense that sometimes Shabbat needs to be not an escape from the issues of the day, but an opportunity to raise our sights and to put what is happening to us in the context of our relationship with God and our relationship with each other and the larger picture. The passage we are about to read is enormously painful in the abstract. I know it is sometimes personally painful for individuals because it is a report of sexual assault. It's a report of rape, and that raises painful memories for some individuals. And it is and trauma, and it is especially difficult to read in light of what we now know has happened, and it may still be happening to some of the captives in Gaza. So I want to just say that up front. This is a very, very painful text. We can't avoid it. This is what we're reading this week. This is chapter 34. That's our reading. And the parallels with the current situation are really, really difficult in the entirety of the chapter. So I'm going to give a rather long introduction to it, and then I'll speak briefly afterwards. The text is crystal clear that what Shechem, who is the prince, the son of the king or the chief of the country, the Hivites there in Shechem, the individual and the town have the same name. The text is crystal clear that what Shechem did to Dinah was rape. The language is terse. He saw, he took, he forced. Right? The language of force here echoes the oppression of the Israelites in Egypt, Inui, right? He forced. I don't think there's any ambiguity about what happened there. Dinah herself never speaks in the entire Torah. The only time she is a subject in the Torah, not an object, is the first verse of chapter 34, Vatetze Dinah bat Leah, asher yalda leYaakov, lirot bivnot haaretz. Dinah went out to see. The entire rest of the time, she is treated more as an object. She is talked about, never to. She is acted upon, and she never speaks. So this part is crystal clear. By the end of the chapter, things will have become much, much more complicated, right? We hear a lot these days the language of moral clarity. But if you turn ahead to page 211, by the end of the chapter, given the response to this crystal clear event, and I'll talk about that in a minute, Jacob says to his sons, to Shimon and Levi, Achartem oti. It's translated here, you have brought trouble on me. Rashi very trenchantly says, it is the language of cloudy water. What Jacob said is, da'ati, my mind, my opinion, my consciousness is not clear now. So we begin with something that is crystal clear, and by the end, nothing at all is clear, and the waters have been very significantly muddied. So what is unclear? What I want to say is that no one's reaction to this horrific event is entirely clear in the Torah. Shem, the one who committed the rape, subsequently professes his love for Dinah and his desire to marry her. Bereshit Rabbah notes that all of the expressions that we use for love are found here. Dvika, dvekut, cleaving in verse 3. Chashicha, yearning in verse 8. Chafitza, delight, chafetz, in verse 19. Ahava in verse 3. And speaking to the heart in verse 3. The Midrash goes so far as to make the comparison to God's love for Israel with Shechem's love for Dinah. Shocking, right? But that's what they do. So we're left with the question, is his love real or not? Is it a self-justification after the fact? A way of resolving his own cognitive dissonance and guilt, right? How could I be the kind of person who would rape a woman? That's not me. No, I really love her, right? We don't know. Is it real or is it not? We also don't know, is it reciprocated, right? We know nothing of Dinah's response to what happens to her. Of course, we are likely to assume we know, but the text is silent. And I want to say, I would caution us even to assume that we know the response of other people to trauma, right? Like there's a tremendous critique, I think, we have of all the players here, that nobody ever talks to Dinah. She's left to bear her response in silence, and we actually don't know how she reacted to this moment. What is Hamor's response? The father, right? The leader of Shechem, who attempts to broker a rapprochement, right? He wants to broker the wedding of his son with Dinah, since that is what his son wants. And he tries to make a deal with Jacob and his sons, and he invites them into a relationship. Let's live together as friends. Let's agree that our daughters will marry each other's children, right? Let's form a community together. Let's do that. Is it a genuine attempt to make amends? Could anything make amends? Does he really mean to live in peace with Jacob's family? It actually sounds pretty good until we get to verse 23. Because what happens is he goes to Jacob, and eventually Jacob's sons come and he lays out his proposal. And Jacob's sons say, yeah, no, we can't marry you because you're not circumcised. We can't do that. So you know what? You want to marry us? You want us to live together as one people? Okay. And they speak with guile. The text says that they're lying. All your males circumcise themselves, and then terrific, we'll be one community and we'll intermarry. And so Hamor goes to the people and explains what happened and says, like, these people are, it's translated here, they're our friends. Shlemim hem, the good people. They come to us wholeheartedly, right? Let's do this. Let's do what they say. Let's all circumcise ourselves and we'll live together as one people. And it sounds terrific until verse 23. And then he says their cattle and their substance and all the beasts, right? All of their property will be ours if only we agree to their terms. Right? Is it really about friendship and making amends, or did they see an opportunity here? You know what? This is a very prosperous people. Let's get them to stay here. And then we can take their property, right? Is that his real goal? Or is he appeasing his people? Is this realpolitik? He's saying what he needs to say to the Arab street in order to make a treaty, in order to avoid having enmity here. We don't know. Hirsch, of course, Rav Hirsch, again, quite trenchantly notes, his negotiation here and his good faith might be more credible if they had brought Dinah back with them before attempting to negotiate. Right? First, return the hostages, then let's have a conversation. Rav Hirsch, 19th century. What about Shimon and Levi? Right? The story we're about to read is hard for that reason too. Shimon and Levi, after the people of Shechem agree to become circumcised so they can all live together on the third day, when they are most in pain, Shimon and Levi go and they kill all the males. They kill everybody in town. Right? There's such discomfort with the story. It's like the story of Esther, right? When we read, that they kill everyone. Right? What's going on with them? What's motivating them? Is it Dinah's honor? Is it their own honor? Is it their mother's honor? The text refers to them, to the brothers, experiencing sadness or sorrow and anger. We can understand it. Of course they're sad. Of course they're angry. An outrage has been committed. This is so offensive, right? The commentators are split in evaluating their actions. There are many commentators who justify them entirely. Some read them as Maimonides is one, that Shimon and Levi were well schooled in Jewish law and in the Noahide rules and in the laws of justice in Masechet Sanhedrin, right? And they knew exactly what they were doing. And the whole town was actually liable for the death penalty under the law, under the Noahide commandments, because they had violated many of these commandments. They were committing idolatry, but also the Noahide laws, which apply to everyone, all the non-Jewish nations, require one to establish a system of justice and have law. And these people were lawless. No one was calling Shem to account. Right? He did this terrible thing, and the town wasn't punishing him. Right? And that's unacceptable. Right? Other commentators note an action like this, when it happens, is never one person acting alone. It requires helpers and collaborators, right? And so the town was involved. This isn't just one bad actor. This is the character of the town. They all deserve to die, right? Some go so far as to say, even the looting that they engaged with afterwards, which we'll read in a minute, they looted, they took everything, also justified as damages for what they did to Dinah. Right? She's entitled to damages, so they took the damages on her behalf. Some note Shimon and Levi probably understood the need for deterrence. Right? It's remarkable when you read these commentaries, you think about where we are today. They understood you can't allow something like this to happen and not respond, or you're going to be vulnerable everywhere. And they were justified. Okay. Other commentators partly justify and partly condemn. And they say, killing Shem and Hamor, yes, they were justified. They deserved it. That's what justice requires. But killing all the innocents, unacceptable. Right? And they say we should not hold back from condemning them for this. We have to look honestly at the text. Unacceptable. Some, in their analysis of this, note the power dynamic, right, in judging the people of Shem. This is the king and the prince. Jewish law says that Jews are never obligated to try the king in court because the power dynamic makes that impossible. You can't expect people, when you have arbitrary power, to hold them to account. It's unrealistic. We're not obligated to do that. How could we expect that of the people of Shem? You can't blame them for what their king did. And so this was unacceptable. Or other commentators say, okay, justified in killing the people because they all were deserving of it. But the looting afterwards? No. Jewish law expressly forbids that everywhere. Not only is that wrong, but it calls into question their motivation for everything. Right? Was this the need to rescue Dinah? We don't know. Was this really about justice? Or was it vengeance and bloodthirst? We look at verse 28 and 29. They seized their flocks and herds and asses, all that was in the town and outside. This is the sons of Jacob. They took all their wealth, all their children, all the women, all that was in their houses, they took as captives and booty. Really? Right? We're okay with that? Many commentators say utterly unacceptable. The question also, is there deception when they speak to Hamor and saying, yeah, we'll marry with you, just circumcised, right? The text specifically says they spoke with guile. Is that justified? Were they really as powerless as they seem? Did they need to do that? Look at the end of what they say in verse 17. But if you will not listen to us and become circumcised, you don't want to do this? We will take our daughter and go. Maybe they were able to do that. Could they? Maybe not. We don't know. And then, of course, Jacob. Note here, despite the last chapters, he is described here, or he is referred to here always as Jacob and not Israel. That suggests that perhaps he's not acting from his higher transformed self. He's at sort of a lower level of his own consciousness. Understandably, he's been through a lot lately, right? He's been traumatized. What is he thinking? What is his initial silence about? If you look back, what we hear is in verse 5, Jacob hears about this. He hears what happens. Verse 6, Shechem's father comes to speak to Jacob. And then in verse 7, Uvenei Yaakov ba'u min hasad, it's verse 5. Yaakov Shama, Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, but his sons were out in the field with the cattle. V'charish Yaakov ad bo'am. He kept silent until they came home. What is his silence? Is it an appropriate and wise taking of a breath before responding with immediately in a reactive way? Is he silent because he feels helpless and weak? I can't deal with this. I'm going to let them deal with it, right? Maybe Jacob is exhausted, right? He had to deal with Lavan, and then he had to wrestle with this being. He just finished his anxiety with Esau, and now this. Maybe he can't. Maybe he's kind of frozen in shock, in a trauma response. Maybe he doesn't know what to do. He is spoken to, but he is silent through the whole chapter. He says and does nothing until the very, very end of the chapter. The second to last verse, he critiques Shimon and Levi. You have brought trouble on me. You've clouded things, making me odious among the inhabitants of the land. We are few in number. If they unite me and attack me, I and my house will be destroyed. Right? His condemnation is ambiguous. Is there a moral critique here? Right? You did the wrong thing. This is Marid Ayin. This is terrible. This is not how Jews are supposed to behave. You make us look bad because it is bad. Or is it just a practical response, right? I understand you want deterrence. I understand we need justice. But all you've done is create more enemies for us. You radicalize everybody by doing this. What are you doing? Right? We don't know what he means. Later, on his deathbed, at the end of the book of Genesis, he will critique strongly Shimon and Levi. On page 300, Shimon and Levi are a pair. This is in his blessings, his deathbed blessings to his children. Shimon and Levi are a pair. Their weapons are tools of lawlessness, Hamas. Let not my person be included in their council. Let not my being be counted in their assembly. For when angry, they kill men, and when pleased, they maim oxen. Cursed be their anger so fierce, and their wrath so relentless. I will divide them in Jacob, scatter them in Israel. That's quite something. What a condemnation. And just a couple of comments here that I wanted to bring. One is Ramban. Ramban says he was angry at them, and he was angered to make sure that what they did not be attributed to him and his advice, which would lead to the Chilul Hashem, a profanation of God's name, that a prophet had committed violence and pillage. And that's the implication of the phrase, let not my soul come into their counsel. It disclaims responsibility for their conspiracy when they answered with guile, and it declares he was not a party to their assembly when they came down on the city and killed everyone, right? That's how Ramban, Nachmanides, reads this. The Or HaChaim reads very differently. The Or HaChaim reads that actually what Yaakov is talking about doesn't relate to this incident at all. Has nothing to do with Dinah and Shem. It has to do with the sale of Yosef. And he criticizes them, right, quoting a midrash in which Yaakov says Shimon and Levi are brothers in degradation. He said to them, you were brothers for Dinah. As it is written, 2 sons of Yaakov, Shimon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword. Why? Because they're all sons of Leah. But not for Yosef, who was a son of Rachel. You sold him, right? You think you're so terrific with brotherly love. You care about this one, but this one you don't see as you're not a brother to him. You only care about because it's your mother? No, unacceptable, right? That's the critique. Finally, the last thing I want to raise, and then we'll read, and then I'll speak a little bit about it afterwards. What is the Torah's stance? This too is ambiguous. We don't know the Torah's view of this. The parasha ends with Jacob critiquing Shimon and Levi, and they respond, Hakzona ya'aseh et achotenu. Should our sister be treated like a whore? End of story. What's the force of that? Is that the Torah's judgment? Shimon and Levi get the last word because they're right. They had no choice. We're going to let this happen? How can you let this happen? You can't let this happen. What do you want us to do? Of course we had to do this. Can't let our sister be treated like this. One reading. Or, is it the Torah's intent? Are we meant to be in Jacob's head? To feel his frustration with his son's rashness and reactivity? To feel as he does, I can't talk to them. They can't hear it. I'm telling them they did wrong, and all they can say is, look what happened, look what happened, look what happened. There's no real conversation here. They're not open to hearing anything. And only years later, when he's dying, can they actually hear the tochacha. And that is the Torah's read. Jacob gets the last word in chapter 49. Or is it the Torah's intent to leave us, we the reader, in the moral quandary? That there is no resolution. And the Torah's intent is to leave us sitting in the discomfort that we feel with the story and with the sense of lack of clarity. Things have become muddy. And it is not only Jacob's da'ati, his consciousness and his thinking process that is no longer clear, but ours too. Is that the intent? So I have a few words to say about this after the reading, but let's read it first. Okay, that's the reading. It is very hard to read. And I want to just offer a few thoughts, really 2 important lessons that I want to pull out of the introduction that I gave and out of the reading itself. The first is that I think the very ambiguity in the text and all of the uncertainty really speaks to the essence of its meaning. What is moral clarity? How do we know when we have it? The initial deed, as I mentioned, is crystal clear and so easy to condemn. But then the people who are most sure of what to do seem to behave the least well. And I think that's true most often, right? I mean, what we can be crystal clear with moral clarity about what was done to us. It is very, very hard to ever have moral clarity about what we do, because we always act with imperfect information, and we always act with mixed motives, and we always act with a certain amount of emotional reactivity and investment. And it how do we know, right? That's the first lesson. The second piece, which is related to the first, and which is where I really want to focus, is the question of with whom are we engaged in conversation and with whom not? Who is listened to? Who is not? Who seeks counsel, conversation, input, collaboration, even potentially challenging conversation? Who is and is not really open to hearing what other people think? Who is not, because they are so sure that they know? So often, as in the story and in life, to tragic effect. My personal favorite reading this year of Yaakov's silence in verse 5 is that he keeps silent until his sons come home, because he is a leader who understands and knows deeply that this is not a moment to act alone, that this is not a moment to trust himself, that he alone knows what is right to do. He's waiting for the rest of the family to come home so they can talk about it, so they can have the collective wisdom of all of them, so that everyone can be included in the conversation and they can make a collective decision of how to move forward, both because it will be a wiser decision and because when a family is attacked, when a people is attacked, one of the most important things is to make sure that we can all stand together and move forward and not start pointing fingers at each other. And the only way to do that is for everyone to be included in the conversation. That's how I want to read Jacob in this moment, right? He's not being wishy-washy. He's not being cowardly. He's not being weak. He's waiting until his family can gather and we can talk about it and make a wise decision. And what happens instead is that his sons aren't interested in conversation. They don't want to hear what he has to say. They don't want to talk about it amongst themselves. They are reactive and they are angry and they act. And I want to say that the tragedy resonates on every level now, right? What we learned, what's been emerging in the Israeli press over a period of time, and the story that the Times just broke about the Tatzpaniot, the spotters, the intelligence agents within the IDF, women who were surveying the border of Gaza and sending out alarms and went unheeded. because the leadership thought they knew the situation. They thought they knew. They thought they knew the reality of what they were facing. They thought they knew what was best to do. And so they simply ignored the counter evidence, not accidental. Perhaps we don't know that these were women. Often when women speak, they're not heard. They're not taken seriously. Remains to be seen whether that was a factor here or not. But what a disaster and a tragedy, because people were convinced they already knew. Simple as that. And what we are doing now, many segments of the Jewish community, in refusing to listen and talk to other segments of the Jewish community. And it's happening in all directions on all sides, because people are convinced they know. People are convinced they have the moral clarity and everybody else is betraying the Jewish people or betraying Torah. Everybody else is wrong. We know what is right. And so we're pointing fingers at each other, and we're not listening, and we're not talking. And many contemporary, not many, that's an exaggeration, the contemporary commentators, especially feminist commentators who are reading this narrative, locate some of the tragedy of this whole story in Dinah herself being someone who is never talked to and never listened to. Right? What happens when certain segments of our community, whoever they may be, in this instance, women, but it could be any group, right, are talked about and acted upon instead of brought into the conversation and taken seriously. And I wanted to share with you a really beautiful, beautiful midrash from the Dirshuni collection, and I'll end with this, by Ayala Tzruya, that starts with the starting point of Dinah's loneliness, of her being unspoken to, unlistened to. It's based on a medieval midrash in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer that is a little bit provocative, but also very rich, that addresses some of the difficulty of Dinah going down to Egypt, which we'll read at the end of the book of Genesis in chapter 46, and also the problem of Joseph once we're down in Egypt and he's there marrying Osnat, who is the daughter of Potiphar, right, and a priest of On. And his children, Manasseh and Ephraim, are the daughters of Osnat. And there's anxiety, like, how could that be that he married this, like, priest of On and, this non-Jewish priest, and now Manasseh and Ephraim have this non-Jewish mother, right? How could that be? So Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says as follows: Jacob's daughter was a tent sitter, like he himself, a dweller in tents. What did Shem, the son of Hamor, do? He brought playful young women around her tent, beating on tambourines. And she went out to see the daughters of the land. And he seized her and lay with her. And she became pregnant and gave birth to Osnat. Okay, so you see what they're doing. Joseph doesn't marry some foreigner, right? Joseph marries Dinah's daughter. Okay. Jacob's sons thought to kill her. Not clear whether it means Dinah or Osnat, because they said, they'll all say throughout the land that there's a whore in Jacob's tents. What did Jacob do? He saves Osnat by doing the following. He wrote the holy name, the Yud-He Vav-He, on a frontlet of gold, on a piece of gold, and he placed it on her neck. This is an image of the Kohen Gadol, has a frontlet of gold with the name Yud-He Vav-He. and he sent her out. He put this on her for protection, and he sent her out of the house so she wouldn't be killed. And the Holy Blessed One saw it all, and the angel Michael descended and picked her up and brought her down to Egypt to the house of Potipharah, and Potipharah's wife was childless and raised her like a daughter, and Yosef took her as a wife. Okay, that's the medieval midrash. Now I'm going to share the screen, and I'll show you what this contemporary midrash does with it. Okay, so this contemporary midrash quotes the end of Genesis chapter 46, when we read that all the children went down to Egypt, all the children, Jacob and his sons, and the sons of Reuven, and the sons of Shimon, and the sons of Levi, and the sons of Yehuda, and the sons of Yissachar, and the sons of Zivulun. These are the children of Leah, who bore them for Jacob in Padam Aram, and Dinah, his daughter, all souls, his sons and daughters, 33. Right? Dinah is like an afterthought. Here's the midrash. A man and his house, his spouse and his children went down to Egypt, and only Dinah, in her loneliness, without a husband or children. And her brothers couldn't speak to her a kind word. Right? It's actually said of the brothers in Yosef. She's picking it up here and saying there's utter silence with respect to Dinah. They can't talk to her. They didn't speak to her when she was young. Thus, and Dinah went out to see the daughters of the land. What's being imagined here? She went out because she was lonely, because she wasn't heard, because she wasn't spoken to, she wasn't taken seriously. In this house filled with men, she wanted the company of women. She goes out to find sisters because she only has brothers who won't talk to her. And then what happens? The terrible thing. They didn't speak to her after Shechem seized and abused her, and didn't even ask her what she wanted. As it is written, they killed Hamor and Shechem, his son, by the sword, and they took Dinah from Shechem's house and they went. They never talked to her. They never asked her. And they didn't speak to her when she was pregnant. They sought to kill her. As it's written, they'll say, should our sister be treated like a whore? Right? They'll say, through all the land, there's a whore in Jacob's tents. We can't have that. Jacob's sons called Dinah's daughter Osnat, that the disgrace of her birth should be remembered, and that her mother, Dinah, always remember her disaster, Ason, and her rape, Ones, that she went out to see the daughters of the land, right? The sons name the daughter in a way that is, they don't even let Dinah name her own daughter. They speak for her, and all they can talk about is disaster and her humiliation and they blame her. But Jacob took note. Jacob is someone, Shema Yisrael, he listens, he hears. And he says, no. Don't call her Asnat, but Atnes. Literally, you are a miracle. Right? Yes, this terrible thing happened. It's not Dinah's fault. It's certainly not her daughter's fault. Every birth is a miracle. And he marked her with a gold frontlet. And he dressed her in a coat of many colors to save her from them. You can hear how the Midrashis is playing with the image of Joseph also, right? The two members of the family who are treated so harshly. And when the day of Jacob's death drew near, he repaired his son's deeds, as it is written, and to Joseph were born in the land of Egypt, Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Osnat, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, had born to him. And Jacob said to Joseph, and now your two sons born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you to Egypt are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be like Ruvain and Shimon, the two oldest to me, right? And the Midrash ends, and a Redeemer comes to Dinah. So I love this Midrash, right? I love this Midrash because it highlights what happens when we can't talk to people, when we deal with what feels offensive and hurtful and a betrayal to us, when in a moment of trauma, perhaps, understandably, but not necessarily excusably, we shut off the conversation. We decide that these people are out. That's where the shame is. We're going to put it over there. We can't talk to them. And how potentially healing it is when we have the courage instead to stay with the hard feelings, to stay with what's difficult, and to look for redemptive possibilities, to hold the humanity. I think this is why, because I've been sitting with this and was planning to teach this, that when I prayed the Amidah, the Kiddushah this morning, V'karazeh elzeh ve'amar, I had that image of, and we look to the left and we look to our right and we invite everyone into the conversation. And we see their humanity. And we know that the people to the left of us and the people to the right of us, even when we think it's such a betrayal, they have something to offer. And we have to engage in conversation. Nobody can be silenced. And we have to move forward together as one family and one people. And only there can holiness be found.